Always this stress. The unloved outsider among our sensations. Nobody likes it. Everyone wants to get rid of it. If you feel the same way, you're in good company. 85% of all people say that stress is harmful and can be eliminated. And for the WHO, it is one of the greatest health risks of the 21st century. But what if it's not the stress that's the problem, but us?
Stress is not bad in general. We just have to experience stress as our friend.
What if it made us more efficient, more committed, more motivated, and more capable of learning? What if it could even strengthen our immune system? Sounds absurd. After all, how can something that makes us so ill awaken such superpowers in us at the same time? Are we running the wrong stress software? Do we need a stress update? And make stress our friend after all? Do we need more stress? Honestly, what kind of question is that? Don't we already have far too much of it? Yes, according to the results of an annual study conducted in 122 countries. In 2021, almost 1 in 2 people said they were suffering from severe stress. A record. So are we living in the most stressful time ever?
If we look back not just 100 years, but thousands of years, the stresses were actually much worse back then. Today we have much less aggression, much less stress than in the past, at least concerning life-threatening situations.
In contrast to our ancestors, our everyday life is much less characterized by hunger, cold, and wild animals. So we should actually be much more relaxed. But why aren't we?
Our biology stems from the development of 120,000 generations of hunter-gatherers. Today's digitalized world is just 1, maybe 2 generations old, and we have to adapt to this environment every day. But we are actually still in the Stone Age biologically, and that's why stress arises.
Does this mean that our built-in stress responses are not biologically suited to our everyday pace? Let's take a closer look. At the beginning of the 20th century, the American physiologist Walter Cannon asked himself, what happens in the bodies of animals and humans when they are in danger? He came across hormonal fireworks in our nervous system.
We have to react quickly, and the body has to be mobilized for this. We need energy and have to concentrate. Noradrenaline and adrenaline act everywhere in the body, accelerate the heart rate, stimulate the production of glucose, and open the alveoli so that we can breathe better.
Cannon called this reaction fight-or-flight response. The Hungarian-Canadian biochemist Hans Selye only realized a few decades later that there was a whole system behind this. He called it stress. Flight or fight are the primary stress responses. We now know exactly what lies behind it in our body. A 4 × 3 × 2 centimeter hormone gland, our adrenal gland. If something causes us acute stress, the adrenal cortex releases stress hormones, especially cortisol. At the same time, our adrenal medulla produces adrenaline. This hormone cocktail puts our body in a state of alarm. And when danger strikes, it acts like highly explosive fuel. We react better, run faster, and jump further than in our normal state. Cortisol is a steroid produced naturally in the body. In other words, we give ourselves a home-brewed stimulant for a short time. But today we rarely find ourselves in life-threatening situations. Instead, our everyday lives are crammed with lots of little things that stress us out, but to which our bodies react as if we were being threatened by a saber-toothed tiger. An evolutionary mismatch.
We are stressed by the fact that news reaches us every day, that we have to process developments in the world unfiltered, whether they are good or bad. All of this means that our stress processing button is always switched on.
Stressverarbeitungsknopf immer angeschaltet ist.
Our nervous system is actually programmed for short-term threats, but not to deadlines at work, math exams at school, or train cancellations just when we urgently need to travel. The problem is that we can't run away from these modern stresses. But then where does all the stress go?
We still have the fight or flight response today, but we no longer reduce it. So we have all these stress hormones circulating through our blood. Cortisol, glucocorticoids, adrenaline, it's all there. But by not moving and sitting tensely in the office and perhaps trying to smile and make a calm impression, we no longer reduce it.
Our stress system is like a rubber band. As long as it gets a rest after stress, it holds the place together. It can also cope with everyday stress, such as being stuck in traffic jams or traveling on crowded trains. The main thing is that we can relax again. But if the stress becomes chronic and we no longer reduce it, the rubber band wears out.
The stress
that can make us ill is the stress that we can no longer switch off. If we are at the mercy of this stress and have the feeling that we cannot influence our living environment according to our own needs, then this can lead to chronic stress, which then makes us ill. City life naturally goes hand in hand with stress.
You can become depressed, you can consume addictive substances to a greater extent, develop concentration problems due to sleep disorders.
You could see stress as an emotional appendix. The world in which we needed it to survive has long since disappeared. In our modern age, however, it is constantly inflamed. At least a third of all social illnesses are caused by chronic stress. It is partly responsible for 160 million psychiatric illnesses per year, in the EU alone. Our modern urban lifestyle is characterized by many forms of stress. Social stress, density stress, isolation stress, and so on.
That's why we find that city dwellers have a higher risk of depression, for example. It is 1.5 times higher. The risk of schizophrenia is even twice as high if you live in the city.
Stress could even be an additional cause of Alzheimer's.
This is entirely possible because some parts of the brain, such as the hippocampus, shrink when they are exposed to chronic stress. There is then a change in the structure of the brain. The memory loss caused by chronic stress can be considerable.
In connection with stress-induced metabolic diseases such as type 2 diabetes and obesity, the Max Planck Institute speaks of a worldwide epidemic-like increase. And stress itself also has epidemic-like properties, because it is transmissible. When we get close to a stressed person, our cortisol levels can equalize. Even the slightest nervousness signals are enough to trigger this empathic stress. So we are little stress seismographs, and we encounter other people's stress everywhere. It constantly threatens to spill all over us. As if all this wasn't bad enough, according to a research project at the University of Zurich, we not only seem to be dealing with our own stress today, but are also working off the stress of previous generations. Is stress hereditary?
We bring a female mouse together with a male for a few days. The male is then removed again. 3 weeks later, the young are born, all healthy, if the mother and father were healthy.
Donc ces petits sont tous normaux, si la maman et le papa étaient normaux.
The experiment was then repeated, but this time with males that had suffered stress trauma in childhood, which had damaged their cognitive abilities and led to behavioral problems. The young mice grew up without direct contact with their father. Nevertheless, they showed identical stress symptoms, and so did their offspring. It has been shown that the effects of stress on cognitive functions, memory, and behavior can be transmitted up to the 5th generation. And not only in males. Stress trauma can also be transmitted to female germ cells. Okay, so much for the mice. Can we derive anything from this for us humans?
Rodents are also mammals, albeit with different characteristics. Their genome is not significantly different from that of humans. They have behaviors that are similar to ours. Can the effects of stress influence human reproductive cells? Yes, probably.
So we are dealing with a chief villain. Stress is not only contagious now, it could be for generations to come. So the matter seems clear. Get rid of it. We tried gentle methods for a long time. Yoga, breathing exercises, mindfulness, jogging. All of these have been proven to lower cortisol levels. But maybe it's time for tougher remedies. If the stress is getting worse, and we can no longer deal with it adequately for lack of saber-toothed tigers, perhaps we should try to get rid of it completely. How about tackling the root of the problem? The stress hormone cortisol. It has long been known that beta blockers slow down the effect of adrenaline and noradrenaline. Many people are also familiar with over-the-counter preparations. But what if we go further? Imagine there was a pill. You take it tonight, and tomorrow morning the stress is gone. And all of it. 60% of you in Germany would take it immediately, 45% in France. What would this world look like? We would finally sleep in stress-free. And we would sleep for a very, very long time. Far too long. Wait a minute. What's going on now?
You become listless, you lack a bit of energy. You have this feeling in the morning that you don't want to get up, that you toss and turn in bed for 2 hours before you wake up.
And when we got up, we would not only be endlessly tired, lacking an appetite and strangely jumpy, we would also be constantly nauseous and dizzy. Our blood pressure would be way down. A life without stress hormones can even be life-threatening.
Stress is vital. We have to experience stress as our friend.
Wait a minute. Are we still talking about the same phenomenon here? How can something that can make us so ill be good for us at the same time? Let's take another step back. What exactly is stress? Let's ask the original father of stress research, Hans Selye, who established the term stress almost 90 years ago. Selye has written 1,700 papers on stress, contributed to 39 books, received 43 honorary doctorates, and was nominated for the Nobel Prize 10 times. If he didn't know what stress was, who did? His definition makes us sit up and take notice. Selye called stress on a biochemical level a non-specific reaction of the body to any demand. In other words, the stress hormone shake that we release in pressure situations is initially neither good nor bad, but simply neutral. But how do we decide what becomes of it? A practical example. 2 dancers leave the stage after a premiere. Both have rehearsed the same amount. Both have been doing their job for the same amount of time. Nevertheless, one of them had a terrible blackout. The other danced the dance of her life. How's that possible?
The effect on the body will be the same. Both will release high levels of these stress hormones. Both will have a very high pulse and high blood pressure. Both will say that they had terrible stage fright beforehand.
The identical stress hormone cocktail of cortisol and adrenaline runs through the veins of both. But the end result is completely different. Why does one cope with stress almost effortlessly and the other collapse under it? Selye suspected that there could be a kind of stress crossroads within us. This is where the hormones take a turn. He called one direction distress.
Distress is basically when I have this stress response from my body, and I also have all these negative thoughts. Automatic processes then take place that lead to a kind of stress spiral. And this can then last for a very long time and in a certain way lead to a cycle where you become more and more stressed because you think more and more negative thoughts.
When we talk about stress today, we actually mean distress. Feelings of being overwhelmed, anxiety, worry, and tension. However, it can also develop into a permanent crisis, which then makes you ill for a long time. But Selye suspected that where there is shade, there is also light. There must be a kind of good stress, eustress. He defined it as an inner motor that drives us to accept challenges and grow from them. And as paradoxical as it sounds, it makes us healthier and more efficient. Sounds like the exact opposite of distress. The problem was, Selye could not prove the eustress. While distress leaves its mark, such as mental or other illnesses, eustress does not. Of course, something that is good for us is difficult to prove medically. This is also reflected in the research literature. If you looked at the databases of publications on stress published worldwide in 2020, you would find 16,400 entries on distress. In contrast, only 203 on eustress. So is there such a thing as good stress? Or not? Was Hans Selye chasing a phantom? From the 1960s onwards, Susan Folkman and Richard Lazarus came a little closer to the answer, via a detour. Test subjects were shown a movie with disturbing content, and changes in skin conductivity were observed. In short, people sweated under stress. However, if people were prepared for what they were about to see, their stress reactions were dampened. They were able to categorize the upcoming challenge. Basically, this meant that stress is what we allow it to be. Stress is a kind of decision and, above all, a matter of the mind. This discovery is therefore also known as the cognitive turn in stress research. Stress is not a one-way street caused by hormones, but depends on how we mentally react to a situation.
Stress can inspire or paralyze us. In a negative stress situation, the hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary gland, which in turn sends a signal to the adrenal cortex, triggering a cascade of processes. This can paralyze our thinking because it inhibits our prefrontal cortex for rational thinking, or you can enter a so-called reward state.
In this reward state, we can even get into a state of flow. Flow describes the feeling of complete immersion that is experienced as exhilarating. Just like children often experience when playing. We then lose track of time and space, are creative and extremely capable of learning.
Then the brain releases dopamine, noradrenaline and acetylcholine, and that means that positive stress exists.
Flow is the icing on the cake, so to speak, of a positive stress experience. However, the first and decisive component of any good stress experience is the feeling of being up to a task.
If we have the feeling that we are not helplessly at the mercy of the situation we find ourselves in, but can also ensure that a problem is solved by taking a certain action, then we have what we call an experience of control or self-efficacy.
Lazarus and Folkman called the model behind this the challenge response. The mere prospect of success immediately calms us down, and stress turns into something positive. Today we know we become physically and mentally more efficient, more motivated, more capable of learning, and strengthen our immune system. So we have an effective antidote to the stress epidemic. Paradoxically, stress. Good stress. That's clear. But how do we go about it? Can we even directly influence where our hormones turn at the stress crossroads?
These are very robust, old neural networks that are activated almost automatically. We have relatively little control over them, and it's not seconds, but milliseconds that make the difference. And that actually happens quite automatically, and our brain decides unconsciously.
And we obviously interpret many more situations in our everyday lives as stressful, dangerous, and beyond our control. Otherwise, distress would not be so rampant. But does it have to stay that way? The decision as to whether we want to flee or accept a challenge does not come out of nowhere. It is based on a kind of pattern recognition. It is partly genetically encoded in us, but to another large extent, imprinting, and we can actively influence that. Let's revisit our dancers, especially the one who had a blackout. Both review the performance.
The Catholics used to say that you should have a reflection and pray in the evening. Well, we all actually do something similar. Some people will think to themselves that it went well. Great, I'll do the same again. The other will think, that won't work, I'm scared. And at the next performance, she or he will be so despondent that it will actually go wrong again.
Running forward 3.5 somersaults.
It sounds trivial, but it's an important process in terms of stress psychology. The post-evaluation. We use the experience we gain to readjust our stress grids, like an instrument on a tuning fork. The fact that we sometimes fail is not the problem, but how we deal with it. The question is, how do we prepare for the next situation? And that is exactly what we can do. We can become more resilient. We can think of our stress grids like a sieve in our brain. We only have limited influence on how many stresses come into our lives. However, we can teach our sieve what it should and should not perceive as really dangerous stress. Researchers at Stanford University proved that this actually works. They took up the experiment by Lazarus and Folkman, but took it to the extreme. Two groups of test subjects were shown videos. One said that stress is harmful, the other that stress strengthens. Stress tests were then carried out. In these tests, the stress is good group had lower cortisol levels, a shorter stress response, and a faster calming pulse than the stress makes you ill group. So there was an effective change in the so-called stress mindset.
There are studies that show that people who believe that stress is bad for them actually feel the negative consequences of stress more strongly, die earlier, fall ill more often, suffer more heart attacks, etc.
This phenomenon is called secondary stress. We stress ourselves because we are stressed. This can trigger real cascades that exhaust us, even if the trigger wasn't that bad.
It's about the approach, the attitude, the phenomenon of the self-fulfilling prophecy. If you talk about it all the time, people actually end up believing that they are stressed.
The problem? Researchers estimate the number of people who have a rigid, negative stress mindset at 85%. That's almost all of us. So it's high time to correct our mindset. But how?
Stressful and challenging situations are part of life. It can be a success to say to yourself, yes, I was exposed to this unplanned situation, and it could perhaps have become even more dangerous. But I reacted well. I found a solution to something that seemed unsolvable. That's a positive thing, and I feel empowered.
But seriously, are a few mantras enough to get stress under control? We say, stress is our friend, and everything will be fine. That sounds like mumbo-jumbo, but not like a sustainable solution. After all, we want to reprogram our brain, reformat our stress hard disk.
We can implement new stress responses in ourselves, but that means a lot of training. We have to practice it again and again because the temptation to fall back into old patterns is great.
In fact, our brain is capable of doing just that, because it not only looks like plasticine, it also behaves like it to a certain extent. Because it's neuroplastic, we can constantly change its structure, no matter how young or old we are. Every interaction, every conversation, every thought is like a new information trail in the brain. This also applies to our stress patterns. If we feel that they are weighing us down, we can override them with the right training.
For example, if I realize that I'm an incredible perfectionist, then I can think about what would actually happen if I didn't complete a task 120%, but perhaps only 100% or even only 80%, and then consider what the worst possible consequences would be. And then you realize how many catastrophizing thoughts you are actually equipped with. And that can cause a real stress spike. But that doesn't have to be the case. Once we have learned this, we can calm ourselves down in good time and call back our inner stress driver, so to speak.
Unseren inneren Stresstreiber quasi zurückrufen.
Conclusion: we can change our attitude to stress. The question remains, is this also reflected in our genes, like a transgenerational stress vaccine? To find out, the offspring of highly stressed mice were subjected to therapy. The mice were given difficult but solvable tasks. They had to find their way to their food in a course that changed daily. This strengthened their body awareness, and they experienced moments of success as soon as they discovered the food. Self-efficacy in mice?
Yes, we have succeeded in reducing the symptoms of stress and transferring this effect to the next generation. It may also be possible to correct stress symptoms in humans that can be traced back to childhood trauma, so that they no longer occur in subsequent generations.
We can therefore break the chain of stress and thereby reduce our stress levels, not just in the here and now, but perhaps also for future generations. We have a whole range of tools to do this: exercise, breathing regulation, healthy eating, and plenty of sleep. We can learn to better manage our everyday stress and always ask ourselves whether the stress we expose ourselves to is even worth it. Chronic long-term stress remains dangerous and should be avoided. But sometimes that may not be possible. What if we are forced to be exposed to it? Many people suffer from existential stresses such as illness, war, and poverty. Nevertheless, there are people who survive such situations without suffering serious long-term psychological consequences. They seem to have an almost limitless resilience to stress. So far, nobody knows why, but there is an assumption.
In acute cases, you certainly sometimes need distraction strategies. And the other thing is that no one who wants to stay mentally healthy assumes that difficult times will stay exactly the same.
Schwierige Zeiten genau so bleiben.
In fact, recent psychological research suggests that hope is more than a quasi-religious concept or mere feeling. Rather, it's a coping strategy to deal with uncertainty over long periods of time without denying reality. So it's no wonder they say that hope dies last. It could even be the strongest protective shield we have against negative stress. What exactly it's all about has not yet been discovered. Until then, we should not give up hope. We can fight back against the stress epidemic by taking a more relaxed view of our new friend, stress.